we're seeing Counter-Strike teams or organizations with Counter-Strike teams being sponsored by major brands overseas. So a lot of car companies got in over the last month.
Yeah.
So, Audi sponsors Astralis, BMW sponsors Cloud9, Honda
Didn't
sponsors,
Nissan get into
Liquid.
Optic Gaming?
Yeah, Nissan with
yeah,
Optic and
Nissan with
Phase.
Optic and FaZe. So all of those have Counter-Strike teams. So
Mm.
obviously there's a learning curve with the marketing managers in these companies of, um, I guess that has to happen with esports. It's not only educating these people that make decisions on what is esports, but then what different areas you can invest in and what games there are within teams or within tournaments, and then okay, well, they have to think, well, where does our brand position in that? And obviously, all of those car companies were comfortable positioning themselves within brands that have their fingers in Counter Strike. And I think we'll see more of that over the years, but it takes a lot of education and a lot of people working behind the scenes, talking to people high up in major companies and just educating them. And sometimes, when people do things for a long time over a number of years, working with marketing agencies and doing the standard TV ads and working with your traditional sports, it's very hard to change their minds and convince them to look at something new, especially when it's so far out of left field. And if they, picture like this CEO who's 60 years old and is going to retire in 5 years, and their marketing manager puts across us, their CMO puts across their desk something about esports. They're going to look at this and be like, "What is this? Is this a joke?" And then they have to
Mm.
then educate their CEO on this and why it might be a good business decision. It's going to take a long time to convince these people um, to put money into the scene. So, and we are slowly seeing that in NA, and I think that that'll also happen in Australia. Um, but personally, when I looked back 3 years ago when I was starting out, I would have thought that this might have been happening by now, but I think it's going to be happening. It's going to take a bit longer.
I
Um,
think there's too much of a negative stigmatism in esports, especially in the first person shooter genres, uh, that it's causing a lot of lack of confidence for organizations to get into. There's a lot of opportunities where it will be mutually beneficial for our developers to work with like a car sponsorship. So like take
mm,
PUBG for example. China, one of the most favorite games in China is PUBG. They have a lot of cars in PUBG. They could sponsor. They could work in be sponsored by one of the major Chinese car brands
yeah,
in and put their logo on
put
like
it
the
in the game.
Dacia or something.
Yeah, like
And that's
Yeah.
quite common in Asia already. Like you can see any TV show, most episodes of like Chinese shows. I've recently been watching a lot lately, so I know this. In every single episode, there's some product placement of an item. So there's a lot of potential opportunities, but it's until the negative stigmatism that is aligned with certain esports games, especially the ones that have guns and people shooting each other, these opportunities just aren't going to be tapped into.
mm,
I think my memory might be failing me here though when I say this. I think from memory, Toyota did CS:GO events last year, early last year, or the year
in
before,
Australia
and
or
no, in Asia.
ah,
I think Rayhan were actually invited to it.
possibly. I do remember
I
seeing
bel
Toyota around somewhere.
yeah, and I'm not sure. I sort of feel that
There was a Toyota Masters in Bangkok
yeah.
last year for $100,000
Wow.
prize.
Mhm. So I guess this comes
Hmm.
from how I sort of envision it. When you look at a lot of, and this is going to come from an old video that I watched of Thorens, where there was a MLG CS:GO event and it was partnered with X Games. So like motorsports, like dirt bike
Yeah,
tricks, and it was at that time of where people weren't considering X Games as a traditional sport. A lot of people do now these days, and I think the car market specifically, comparing actually like racing cars, I think they went through a lot of that when that first came around as a competitive. environment when the first like the first tracks were made. People considering calling it a sport, I think they went through the same struggles years
Yep.
ago as we are now. Let's face it happens on the daily. There would be some article out there, someone out there saying esports isn't a sport. And I think the racing and car industry, and let's face it, is there even a single car manufacturer that isn't sponsoring it in the racing? I don't think there is. So they went through this sort of age, I guess, this sort of time where they were wanting to be considered a sport as well. Their whole industry wanted to be supported to sport, but it never sort of happened. It did eventually happen, but it didn't happen off the start. And that's what we're facing as esports. So I think that really helps when these car industries are coming into the esports scene. Because they're unlike, for example, comparing to a soccer club or the AFL clubs. I guess AFL clubs are a bit different because they get an incentive or a bonus or something if they partner into esports. Remember that got released right before, I think, Bombers bought out Sin Gaming. That was interesting. But you get where I'm coming from. Motorsports wasn't originally considered a sport, so they sort of understand where we're coming from as an esport, where people aren't considering us as a sport in the sport market.
Yeah, they're probably feeling a bit of deja vu over there, those car companies.
Really helps. It really helps.
Yeah, okay.